There's no denying that horror has always been a highly subjective genre. While on one hand, we have horror aficionados who would literally line up to see every film that's out there, on the other hand, there's also this long list of viewers who want absolutely nothing to do with horror flicks at the end of the day. This of course brings us to the mechanisms of both mainstream horror and indie horror. Mainstream horror undoubtedly has a limitation of gore and scares on display, thereby being on the lighter side of the spectrum and making the concept of horror available to everyone. As for indie horror, movies falling under this popular category have a lot to offer, with some of the most compelling, thought-provoking stories in the genre being both raw and innovative. While there's an ocean of fantastic indie horror flicks out there, we've picked 15 of the scariest indie horror films ever made for today's video. Mind you, our list is in no particular order. We suggest you stay tuned till the end of this video to see if your favorite scary indie horror movie is included in our list. Are you ready? Without further ado, let's dive right in. But before we get into our explanation, we do have one very small request. If you enjoy our content, then please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Now let's begin. The Blair Witch Project, 1999. There's a reason why this low-budget indie horror film is addressed as a masterpiece to date, and also seen maintaining its top rank in the best horror movie categories. The found-footage horror flick, co-directed, co-written, and co-edited by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez, had an unbelievable impact not only on the horror genre, but also on the entertainment industry as a whole. The plotline follows 3 film students setting out to produce a documentary about the Blair Witch legend. They travel to Burkittsville in Maryland, interview the locals, and, upon gathering information, venture into the Black Hills forest only to become disoriented, lost, and increasingly paranoid. Eventually, they go missing. However, their footage is discovered mysteriously a year later, which the audience sees as the movie. What you're looking at basically happens to be a sleeper hit, one that had on display an ending that irrefutably happens to be one of the most notably terrifying in the history of horror, leaving behind the viewers with this haunting sense of mystery and dread for days. Now, to those of you wondering what is it that makes the Blair Witch Project such a groundbreaking horror classic, well, it has to be the flick's found footage style, and add to this its improvisational approach that keeps the film so raw and realistic at the end of the day. The manner in which it slowly builds tension, then becomes increasingly unsettling, and finally explodes into outright horror make it an instant classic, thereby blurring the very lines between what is fact and what is fiction. Despite the lack of structure and guidelines within the movie, you have an intriguing backstory, a well-thought-out plotline with sketched-out characters, and, truth be told, it's mainly these that make the Blair Witch Project highly innovative for its time. Also, how can one ever disregard the genius marketing strategy of the film, which actually stated that the cast members were either missing or deceased? We know for a fact that we can't dismiss the fake supplementary content that was resorted to in order to enhance the sense of realism and not see the flick as superficially horrifying. Care to share your thoughts on this in the comments section? The Evil Dead, 1981. Of course, not including Sam Raimi's feature directorial debut in today's list would be a cardinal sin. From developing a reputation as one of the most significant cult classics to being cited among the greatest horror flicks of all time, this highly successful independent supernatural horror movie stars Michigan native Bruce Campbell as one of the 5 college students who is seen traveling to this isolated cabin in rural Tennessee. What was otherwise meant to be a fun weekend turned into a living nightmare, with the group laying their hands on an audio tape, which, when played, ended up resurrecting a demonic entity. Everybody except for Campbell's character Ash transforms into horrid-looking ghouls, which leads to Ash getting tangled in the onslaught of increasingly unrestrained gore and violence. Who would have ever thought that Raimi's The Evil Dead, which was shot on a shoestring budget and practically in the woods of Tennessee with a total of just 13 crew members, would end up leaving such an indelible mark on the horror genre. To top things, the movie was also filmed in 16mm, but with Raimi's unique camera angles, fast-paced movements through the woods, and add to this the deadly combination of nauseating gore and campy humor, The Evil Dead ended up becoming a masterpiece of shock and horror. Truth be told, Raimi's budget for the movie didn't allow him a heap of special effects, so he had to be dependent on what he knew, and that was his ability to create a compelling atmosphere by resorting to the camera. With this film, Raimi effectively manages to create an impressive opening that leaves his audience glued to their seats in sheer suspense about what is to come. Very different for its time, this gory fright flick delivers both scares as well as special makeup effects. Of course, the movie's high points unquestionably happen to be the pus-oozing deadites. And may we add here that Tom Sullivan has done a fantastic job with the prosthetic makeup. In short, this film is one hell of a ride that continues to add entries to its lasting franchise, the latest being the 2023 Evil Dead Rise. Halloween, 1978. John Carpenter's Halloween certainly needs no discussion, especially when it comes to indie horror films. And to be honest, it's nothing short of a horror masterpiece. Categorically, one of the greatest slashers to have ever been made, and dare we disregard the most iconic masked villain of all time, Halloween has spawned a film franchise, which itself comprises 13 films, each helping construct an extensive backstory for the one and only Michael Myers. Set in the fictional Illinois town of Haddonfield, the narrative follows escaped mental patient Myers, who comes back to his hometown on the night of Halloween to pick up where he left off 15 years ago. Well, if one is to take a look at the high points of this epic slasher here, Carpenter's background score alone is capable of sending shivers down the spine even to this very day, creating that perfect blend of anxiety and dread. 46 years later, not a single horror movie theme song has managed to come even the tiniest bit close to being this freaky. Next, Halloween also gave us one of the best final girls in the history of film. Yes, we're talking about Jamie Lee Curtis making her film debut as the teenage babysitter Laurie Strode. Also, Alfred Hitchcock's influence on this movie is vividly noticeable, given the very casting of the late Janet Leigh's younger daughter Jamie in the leading role as an homage to Psycho. Mind you, the movie actually features very little blood, or gore for that matter. It's heavily dependent entirely on suspense and atmosphere to build up on that tension and fear. The attention to detail regarding every murder on display categorically makes this flick scare the living daylights out of everyone. Halloween is intentionally slow-paced, and if you ask us, this actually works wonders in favor of the movie, thereby also being one of its biggest strengths. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. When the king of transgressive horror, the late Tobe Hooper, directed, co-wrote, and produced The Texas Chainsaw Massacre using a cast of relatively unknown actors, little did one know that he would literally take the whole world by storm. Well, it's fitting to state that Hooper's work on the horror movie was absolutely seminal, and it ended up spawning a franchise that carried forward the very story of the hulking, masked, cannibalistic killer Leatherface and his family through a multitude of prequels, sequels, remakes, comic books, a novel, and also 2 video game adaptations. Now, story-wise, the plot is kept rather simple. A group of friends take a road trip to rural Texas to visit the grave of siblings Sally and Franklin's grandfather. On the way, they fall victim to a cannibalistic family, and what follows is one of the most nightmarish fights for survival. Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre will always be remembered for its psychological horror, which induces an eerie atmosphere of dread for the viewers. The fact that this gritty masterpiece here did not compromise even the tiniest bit on terror and violence is the real reason why it was banned in several countries. You'll be surprised to learn that Hooper actually had the idea for the movie while he was out shopping for Christmas. Apparently, Hooper was right next to the hardware section that was packed to the brim with people, and while he was thinking of a way to get out of there, a bunch of chainsaws caught his attention. Well, that's how the film idea popped up, and Hooper eventually came up with his iconic iconic slasher flick. While it's true that the character of Leatherface and some minor story specifics were inspired by the crimes of the notorious serial killer Ed Gein, there was just no stopping Leatherface from becoming a horror icon. You see, the amount of tension his character brings about can be pretty overwhelming at times, but then again, that's precisely what keeps you driven to the very edge of your seats the whole time. It doesn't matter if we're currently in the year 2024 and the year this movie was released was way back in 1974, the rawness of this classic here manages to hold up to this very day, and there's just no denying that.
You just make things worse.
X 2022. It's only fitting to state that Ty West's X is the filmmaker's new love letter to the slasher genre. West categorically makes use of the standard slasher formula and puts an entirely fresh spin on it. The plotline centers around a young filmmaking crew who's on the way to a remote farmhouse in rural Texas. The plan is to use the property as a filming location for their adult movie. All goes well until the homicidal elderly couple who has rented their property to the group catches them in the act. West's X happens to be a wildly entertaining slasher, one that exemplifies a rather contemporary take on the psycho-bitty horror genre. Now, to those of you who are oblivious to this particular genre subdivision, we're basically stressing on aging women essaying themselves as violent characters. Of course, people who have seen X know exactly what we're talking about here. X does not hold itself back at all when it comes to the slasher aspects, so it's safe to say that the gore is done exceedingly well here. With that being said, something that seems to have struck many viewers who have watched the movie is how deftly X portrays the concept of age and its very impact on people and their relationships. It also helps that the characters featured are very well written. Special mention to Mia Goth and Jenna Ortega, who are absolutely brilliant here. Also, the fact that tension is maintained consistently all throughout the runtime makes this flick here a bloody, satisfying horror movie, one that's packed with just the right amount of jump scares. Skinkamarink 2022. Kyle Edward Ball's audaciously odd directorial debut follows siblings Kevin and Kaylee waking up in the middle of the night to discover that their father is missing and that all the windows, doors, and other objects in their house are mysteriously vanishing one after the other. In case you're wondering, yes, this is precisely the thin, ambiguous, and open to interpretation storyline of the 2022 Canadian experimental art supernatural psychological horror film that we are currently dealing with. Honestly speaking, who would have ever thought that a film with a $15,000 budget, shot inside the very house of the filmmaker's mother over the course of 7 days, would actually make over $2 million, thereby becoming a box office success? With Skinkamarink, Ball effectively manages to invoke a certain sense of dread in his audience, deliberately playing around with people's fears and dreams, and also incorporating sounds in the flick that one would not really make out. There are moments of pure horror that have the power to freak out anybody for that matter, but then again, the movie here is certainly not for everyone. Skinkamarink offers a slow-burning, psychological horror experience that explores the very theme of the unknown and the unexplained. No wonder it's received commendation, particularly for its atmospheric tension, innovative storytelling, and its ability to craft fear from the unknown. Some may find Skinkamarink less appealing given its abstract nature, but if you ask us, it's surely a thought-provoking watch. Hush 2016. First things first, Mike Flanagan, the director of Hush, and Kate Siegel, the co-writer and the leading star of the movie, are actually a married couple. Wondering why and how is this relevant here? Well, the duo pretty much came up with the storyline of this slasher flick while they had gone out on a dinner date. Okay, now that that's clear, let's take a brief look at the plot line. So we have Maddie Young, a deaf and mute horror author who is seen living a secluded life in the woods in the hopes of making more progress with her writing career. But when an unrelenting masked killer threatens her and her haven, her calm existence is completely toppled and turned into a nightmare. Given her disabilities, will Maddie be able to survive against the masked intruder and make things work in her favor? Well, to know what happens, you've got to see this heart-pounding slasher thriller here. Flanagan's Hush happens to be a cleverly written, well-paced, tense, low-budget slasher with a minimal synth score that actually works wonders in favor of the movie. It's constantly engaging, and for that, we have Kate Siegel and John Gallagher Jr. to give full credit to. By blending the familiarities of the formulaic home invasion subgenre with the unpredictability of the flick's intriguing premise, Flanagan gives Hush a decent twist. If you're someone who has still not watched Hush, we highly recommend that you do so at your earliest. Creep 2014. Directed and co-written by Patrick Bryce, Creep stars Bryce as a struggling videographer who takes up an assignment from an online ad and travels to a remote mountain town. There he meets his client Joseph in his family cabin, who tells him that he has an inoperable brain tumor and wants Aaron to record a video diary for his unborn child. However, things turn dark, especially with Joseph's erratic behavior and shady confessions. Of course, this leads Aaron to question Joseph's true motives, as his client clearly does not seem to be what he initially appeared to be, and he starts to fear for his own safety. The high point of this found-footage psychological horror movie categorically has to be Joseph. His eccentric behavior and the mystery surrounding his real intentions keep the viewers glued to their seats. Creep is an amalgamation of horror, drama, and comedy that is so tightly interweaved that you just don't know what to expect in the following scene. One has to give full credit to Mark Duplass, who is not only the co-writer of the movie, but also plays the assertively goofy antagonist, Joseph. The fact that Duplass could actually come up with a character who is not only terrifying, but also relatable at the end of the day, effectively gives one the creeps. There is this intense, ominous vibe throughout the runtime of 77 minutes, which culminates in a great ending. Creep's success led to a sequel in 2017, and a potential third film is currently in development. Man Bites Dog, 1992. First things first, this black comedy film, directed, written, and produced by the celebrated trio of Benoit Poelvoorde, Remy Belvaux, and André Bonzel, happens to be one of those horror flicks that just feels way ahead of its time. The narrative has a crew of filmmakers who are following the murderous misadventures of a serial killer and recording his horrific crimes for a documentary that they are producing. With the crew initially being mere impassive observers, they gradually find themselves drawn to the serial killer's chaotic and nihilistic lifestyle. It's fair to state that Man Bites Dog has become a cult film since its release, having received a rare NC-17 rating for its theatrical release in the US. You have a narrative that is highly unpredictable and overflowing with pitch-black humor. And dare we disregard the raucous dialogues featured here? Poelvoorde has also brilliantly essayed the very character of the easily enraged, brutal serial killer, and he's responsible for plenty of genuinely distressing sequences. The fact that the movie was shot on a shoestring budget and still managed to impress on every damn level makes it an ideal example of independent filmmaking. While it's a visually arresting film with an impressive sound design and a rather interesting message at its core, Man Bites Dog is certainly not for the squeamish. To say that this film is disturbing and leave things there is a giant understatement, and those who have seen the movie will definitely agree with us. Funny Games, 1997. Can you think of a movie that will make you feel uncomfortable in your own home? Well, if you ask us, we can only think of Mikhail Haneke's 1997 psychological horror thriller film titled Funny Games. Truth be told, we're looking at a brutal flick that is literally capable of blurring the line between fiction and reality, while also highlighting the very act of observation. The plot has George, Anna, and their son Georgie being taken as hostages inside their holiday home by two seemingly well-educated but exceedingly violent-natured young men, who initially appear to be friendly neighbors. The two men, who address each other as Paul and Peter, amongst other names, start tormenting the family by forcing them to play sadistic games with one another for their amusement. Funny Games is everything else but the title, and no, we are not joking about this. It's a macabre home invasion story, devoid of glamour, humor, and even mercy for that matter. Haneke's screenplay is full of surprise surprises and twists, and the entire film has every little detail in the right place. This highly unsettling and thought-provoking flick will actually make you stare in disbelief at what's happening on screen, even though most of the violence depicted is off-screen. Austrian actor Arno Frisch and German actor Frank Gehring are excellent as the two insolent young psychopaths who derive utmost pleasure in playing disturbing, violent games on their unwilling participants. Please don't make the blunder of mistaking funny games as a conventional thriller. It's Haneke's film after all, and we all know Haneke has a particular reputation for shocking his audience first, only to hit them in the guts and then shock them again. Pearl 2022. The prequel to Ty West's X not only has Mia Goth reprising her role as the titular protagonist, but the psychological horror film also serves as an origin story for X's iconic villain. The events of the second installment in West's X film series takes place 61 years before the events of X. Pearl is shown to be a young and recently married woman residing on her parents' homestead while her husband is away, serving in the First World War. Pearl is highly ambitious and aspires to become a famous movie star, but that does not sit well with her bitter, domineering, and devout mother. Simmering with rage and deep, dark desires, Pearl ends up committing unspeakable violent acts. Now, the movie happens to be an exceptionally well-crafted origin story of a villain, satisfying fans with the character's much-needed depth and background that we have craved ever since X had its theatrical release. It's safe to say Mia Goth was simply brilliant and the undisputable high point of the movie. Goth as Pearl is a character whom you actually feel sorry for, but the minute you see her on the brink of her madness, you start feeling scared. Her unbroken monologue is captivating enough to have your eyes glued completely to the screen without even blinking. The film is a perfect blend of horror and drama, and to top things, a great story is thrown in the mix. If you still haven't watched Pearl, we suggest you do so and tell us your thoughts about it in the comments section. When Evil Lurks 2023. Well, when a horror film has a tagline that states, "There's no point in praying," you just know it for a fact that it can't be taken lightly. Also, when the filmmaker concerned happens to be none other than Demian Rugna, you know shit is about to get real. To those of you who are hearing about Rugna for the first time, let's catch you up to speed with his type of movies and take When Evil Lurks as an example. The supernatural horror flick basically has a demon that you cannot stop, horror that you can't unsee, and a darkness that you can't outrun. So now you have a fair idea of the path that we've taken. In terms of the storyline, the residents of a quaint rural town, upon discovering that an unborn demon is awaiting physical birth, take matters into their own hands to end up inadvertently causing unthinkable chaos. Resorting to outstanding practical effects and the concept of a primordial evil that thrives on chaos, Rugna delivers a knockout punch with When Evil Lurks. Addressing every gorehound out there, this movie here is bound to intrigue quite a lot of you because, believe us when we tell you, this film raises the bar pretty high when it comes to carnage and gore. Also, you will be thoroughly mistaken if you think When Evil Lurks is some run-of-the-mill demonic possession flick. What if we tell you the movie doesn't have the slightest trace of a church, cross, holy water, or 360-degree head rotations and body contortions? Of course, it's a huge breath of fresh air, and the innovative approach makes Rugna stand out from the crowd. It's a sheer treat for every horror fan out there, and we suggest you give it a shot if you still haven't. Midsommar 2019. Ari Aster's folk horror film stars Florence Pugh and Jack Raynor as this couple who is drawn to a 9-day midsummer festival in the rural Hälsingland region of Sweden. While initially it seems like a pastoral paradise, the relaxing retreat soon takes a sinister turn when the outsider guests are coerced to take part in the increasingly disturbing festivities. Ari Aster's Midsommar isn't your regular horror film, so if you're expecting jump scares, you'll be disappointed. What Ari has done here is that he's created this colorful, sunlit backdrop in a beautiful Swedish field, and then contrasted it with these atrociously horrific ritualistic acts taking place right in the middle of it. Now, to be able to do something like this surely needs a mastermind. And who better than Ari Aster? From a slow-building narrative packed with tension to plenty of look-away gore and breathtakingly stunning cinematography work, Ari makes you appreciate Midsommar 1 minute, and the next minute you're twitching in your seat, being rather uncomfortable. Pugh is exceptional in the movie. She's like the heart of the flick, and that demented smile of hers towards the end can easily send shivers down the spine. If you ask us, the movie is an absolute must-watch. Wrong Turn, 2003. When Rob Schmidt came up with this epic slasher film here, he made it pretty clear that his movie was his own personal tribute to Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes. Honestly, who would have ever thought that a simple plot line, which had a group of 6 people being stalked by a family of overtly grotesque-looking cannibalistic mountain men in the remote woods of West Virginia, would end up spawning a film series that currently consists of 7 films? Of course, the high point of Wrong Turn categorically happens to be the murderous inbred hillbillies, and with the late Stan Winston designing the creature effects, it definitely worked wonders in favor of the movie. Next, the fact that Schmidt didn't go out of the way to create comedy and kept the harrowing atmospheric mood intact did keep the film raw. Wrong Turn is not for the faint of heart. Those who have seen it will certainly agree with us on this, and to be honest, we find it pretty hard to imagine that there's still someone out there who is yet to watch this flick here. Resolution, 2012. Co-directed by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, and boasting a screenplay also by Benson, Resolution follows a graphic designer who travels to a remote rural area in the hopes of saving his delusional, erratic, drug addict best friend. However, what begins as an attempt to make his friend sober up and get his life back on track soon takes an unexpected turn that neither of them was ready for. Resolution happens to be exceptionally creative and offers a rather unique cinematic experience that defies genre classification. The film is very well paced, and may we also add here that it does a great job building up an unusually dreaded atmosphere. Of course, the ending is bound to take you by surprise, and while we won't be going into the details of that, we'd like to give a special shout out to Peter Ciela and Vinnie Curran, who are both fabulous in their roles. If you ask us, the duo's relationship with each other felt so organic. Having said that, Resolution isn't really an easy film. It does not give one easy answers. It's different, it's unsettling, and it certainly deserves to be seen. Marvelous verdict. Well, with this, we finally come to the end of our video here. So what are your thoughts about these indie horror movies? Did your favorite indie horror flick make it on our list? We would honestly love to know what you feel, as in which amongst the mentioned ones do you not fancy at all, in the comments section down below. Now, if you enjoy this video, you know what to do. Please do leave a thumbs up and stay tuned with us, as we promise to come back with more exciting content. Till then, goodbye, and thanks for watching. Have a nice one.